Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to Volume 2 in our series on how to get the most from practicing scales. I'm going to assume if you're checking out this tutorial that you've already covered all of the content in Volume 1 in this series. Today I want to start by talking about the difference between classical and jazz rhythm when you're practicing your scales. If we take a G major scale played at 60 beats per minute in a classical style, then each quaver that you play, if you're playing each note as a half beat note, each quaver that you play will be played for exactly 1/2 of 1 second. If there's 60 beats per minute, that means each beat is 1 second. A crotchet would be played 1 crotchet per second. But a quaver is half of a crotchet, it's a half beat note. Therefore, each of your notes in a major scale played in classical time as quavers at 60 beats a minute would be exactly 1/2 of a second. Now, I won't put the metronome on here, but I'll play the G major scale just at a set speed, and you'll hear that each note in the scale is held for the same length of time as the preceding note. Okay, that's in classical style. If we played the same scale at 60 beats a minute but in jazz rhythm, each of those quavers now would be split between a longer note and a shorter note. And to approximate it mathematically, the downbeat note, the longer of the two quavers, would be played for approximately 2/3 of the beat, and the second quaver would be played for the remaining 1/3 of the beat. So if we want to do mathematics, if we're going at 60 beats per minute, each quaver in classical music is played at exactly 1/2 a second per note. But in jazz, the first of those pairs of quavers would be played for 2/3 of a second, and the second quaver would be played for 1/3 of a second. I'll now demonstrate what the G major scale sounds like played in quavers but in jazz rhythm. So if I play those two scales beside each other now, first in classical, then in jazz, you'll hear a very distinct difference. So immediately you have an interesting challenge when you're playing your scales. Do you practice them in jazz mode or in classical mode? My advice is practice them in both different styles. They are separate challenges, and your fingers will definitely get a surprise when you try and play a major scale at the same speed using the same type of note, that is in quavers or half-beat notes, and you switch from classical to jazz. There is a much faster movement between the note changes in the jazz style because you don't get exactly 1/2 a second to play each new note. You've got this combination, this do-da-do-da-do-da-do-da-do-da-do-da-do. So you've got this quick little 1/3 of a second note, then a 2/3 of a second note. So long note first, 2/3 of a second, 1/3 of a second. But that little short note creates an interesting fingering challenge that your fingers have to be quite sprightly to keep up with the jazz rhythm. If you're looking for a good example of a saxophone classic song that really highlights the swing timing, check out the original Glenn Miller Orchestra recording of In the Mood. In the Mood was probably the Glenn Miller's orchestra's biggest hit song, a multi-million selling instrumental song. The Glenn Miller Orchestra were one of the most famous big bands in the World War II era of swing music. In the Mood is the song that goes like this. Now I played that in the key of F major, not G major, but the important thing was there that you heard that all of those notes except for the tag at the ending there are quavers. On the written sheet music, all of those notes would be represented as half-beat notes, but you could hear in the melody of In the Mood, each note is not of equal length. Do-da-da-da-do-da-do-do-da-do-da. It's got that real jazz syncopation to it. And the saxophone, of course, is one of the ideal instruments in music to play syncopation on, and jazz and blues and creative music. It lends itself really well to the human expression. It's quite an easy instrument to change notes on. Therefore, you've got to learn to make your saxophone speak, and more importantly, learn to make it sing. In Volume 1 in this series, we focused on the G major scale played in ascending and descending order. We didn't alter the order of the notes, we just played them strictly as they appear in the scale when we were practicing the scale. Today I want to expand that concept a little further and introduce the idea of playing a major scale in thirds. What that means is simply that we think of the notes as numbers. So the first note in the scale was G, that's number 1. If G is number 1, the third note in the scale would be B. We leave out A, so 1, 2, 3, G, A, B. So 1, 3 would be G to B. That's a major third. The easiest way to think of what the next notes are is just to reset the count on the note that you haven't played yet, which was A, and think of it as being number 1 in the scale again. What would be the third note if A was the first? Well, it would be A, B, C. C would become the third note if A was 1. The next note would be B. What would be the third note if B was 1? B, C, D. D would be the third note. And you take that concept right up until you end up on high G. Now, I'll let you think those notes through, and I'll actually put the notes up on the screen, but I'll talk them through with you now, and this is something you need to work out on your own. You really won't learn it just by watching the notes that I put up on the screen for you. I'm just putting them there so you've got to check to make sure that you do get the right answer. In fact, I'd recommend that you stop the video now and maybe on a piece of paper, try and work through the balance of those pairs of notes. So G to B, A to C, B to D, C to what? And then D to what, E to what, F sharp to what, and then we end up on G. So here's the answer to the quiz. The notes will be G, B, A, C, B, D, C, E, D, F sharp, E, G, F sharp, A, and we end on G. We have to go up above the G, otherwise we never get to play the third from an F sharp. Now, I'll play that exercise now on the saxophone. I'll play it reasonably quickly. I'll play it in classical style, then I'll play it in jazz style. Now you can hear that just introducing that new concept of a major scale, we're still only playing just the notes from a major scale, but we have expanded our vocabulary, our choice of sounds if we were creating a song, our own little improvisation, dramatically by practicing that scale in thirds. The notes are now not just walking consecutively up a set of stairs, they're bouncing around. They're going 1, 3, 2, 4. They're skipping stairs and then jumping back down. And songs are like that. Melodies don't just progressively get higher or lower. They bounce around everywhere. Now, we have to play that scale in thirds in reverse order, in descending order. So again, I'll talk you through those notes coming down. So we'll start on G, in this case G with the octave key. So it will be the same in reverse. G to E, F sharp to D, E to C, D to B, C to A, B to G, A to F sharp, and end on G. Again, we have to go below G to let A have its third leap, and that'll drop down to F sharp below our starting note, and then we end on the note we started. Again, I'll play that both in jazz and classical style. I'll start with classical. Now, the final challenge in today's tutorial is to combine both the ascending and the descending components that we've looked at into a single exercise to be played on one breath at a speed of 120 beats per minute. So here's 120 beats per minute. The challenge is to play the exercises we've played individually as quavers at 120 beats a minute. So that would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now I sang that or spoke that in jazz timing there. If I was talking in classical, I would go at this speed. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Okay, there's a huge difference. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... It's very noticeable, and you have to be very careful as a saxophone player to make sure when you're playing music with other people that you use the right inflection, the right rhythm. Are you playing a piece of music that should be played in jazz or swing style, or should you be playing the music strictly as it's written in classical style? For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to play this exercise in jazz style. That's the harder of the two as far as moving our fingers at speed. I'll play along with the metronome. You may need to do this much slower than me. You may need to do this at 60 beats a minute and take several breaths as you play. But at 120 beats a minute, you should be able to comfortably play this in quavers, both in classical or jazz style, on a single breath. 1, 2. I can't stress enough that building technique on your saxophone is not a race. There's no point trying to play along with me at the speed I'm performing on this tutorial if you're just not up to that speed. Take your own time in your practice room, set your metronome at 60 beats per minute, not 120, and work up from there if you need to. Remember, if you're playing it at a slower speed, you will have to take at least one or more breaths throughout. It's very comfortable for me to play that whole exercise on one breath at 120 beats per minute, and it should become that way for you too, but it may not instantly be the case. I hope you've gained something from this tutorial. There's some more challenges there for you. We've talked about the big difference between jazz and classical timing, the different sounds that creates, the different fingering challenges. We've also talked about practicing your major scales in thirds. Everything we've done in this series so far, we're focusing on just one key, the key of G major. But remember, there are 12 starting notes on any instrument that you can play a major scale from. There are 15 written key signatures, but only 12 actual sets of fingerings. So in further tutorials, we'll look at how you can play in what I call the key of life, where you're not limited to just technique in one or two keys. You've got to be good in all of the keys in music. So on the saxophone, you need to be able to play an A flat major scale just as easy as you can play a G major scale. So that was me starting on the note A flat, not G. However, if you couldn't see my fingers, and on that video you couldn't, unless you could hear the pitch, there was no difference in how I played the G major scale to the A flat major scale. Remember, 12 different sets of fingerings, and you need to get command over all of those scales in every key. As always, keep in touch via my website. That's www.brianhayes.biz, B-I-Z. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you're alerted when I post new videos on the many instruments that I play and teach. And if you've got any queries about how to best practice your scales on the saxophone, by all means drop me an email and I'm happy to answer just some fundamental questions for you. Bye for now.